Sometimes the world moves on before you even realize you've been left behind. That early autumn morning, the woods in northern Minnesota were thick with mist. Tall pines standing like silent guards, their needles slick with dew. Through that gray hush, a mother bobcat crept low to the ground, every muscle tight, eyes darting from side to side as she ferried her 3 kittens to safety. Somewhere deeper in the forest, coyotes howled, sharp, hungry cries cutting through the fog. The mother's fur stood on end with every step. She moved fast, carrying her spotted babies by the scruff, slipping them one by one through brambles and over tangled roots, her heart pounding with each distant snap of a twig. But the smallest kitten, Harper, had been struggling from the start. Tiny, each breath a rattle, legs shaking as he tried to keep up. The world pressed in, wild, cold, and enormous. The mother hesitated for just a second, eyes flicking between her struggling baby and the danger in the distance, then made a choice she'd regret long after the pines swallowed her up. Harper was left behind. For him, it was as if the world collapsed in a single heartbeat. The hush of the forest grew huge and empty. The warmth of his mother faded, replaced by a cold that reached deep into his bones. Fog wrapped around him, damp against his fur. The coyotes howled again, closer now, their voices curling through the trees and sending him scrambling for shelter beneath a fallen log. Each breath burned in his little chest, his lungs fighting for air, heart beating so hard, he wondered if the whole forest could hear it. Is this what it means to be forgotten? He didn't think the words, just felt it in the hollow of his belly, the ache in his throat, the electric shiver of fear running along his tail. He tried to cry out, a weak, small sound that disappeared into the fog. No one answered. Every branch, every shifting shadow seemed dangerous now. The world, once crowded and warm with his siblings pressed in close, was suddenly huge, empty, and full of threats. Harper lay perfectly still, hoping his mother would come back. Time crawled. Tears blurred his vision, but he was too scared to close his eyes. All around him, life went on. Squirrels chattered, a jay screamed, something heavy and unseen padded nearby. The log he hid under was rough and damp against his cheek. It gave shelter, but not comfort. He tried to remember the smell of his mother, the way her purr vibrated through him, the gentle softness of her fur. But all he could taste was the bitter tang of fear in his mouth. As the day brightened, Harper only grew weaker. Hunger clawed at his belly, but each time he tried to stand, the world spun and his legs gave out. His breathing grew harsh and loud. Sometimes, in the shifting fog, he imagined shapes, maybe his mother's eyes or the flash of a coyote's teeth. He shivered, curling up as small as he could, wishing he could disappear. But the world doesn't stop for a lost kitten. It just keeps spinning, untamed, indifferent. Hours slipped by. At one point, a pair of crows landed nearby, cackling at each other as they watched Harper with shiny black eyes. One hopped closer, cocking its head as if to ask, "What are you still doing here? Don't you know this place eats the weak?" Harper looked away, but their laughter echoed in his ears long after they had flown. The first night fell quickly. Cold pressed in, sharp and unforgiving. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their voices weaving through the trees. Harper closed his eyes, praying for sleep that wouldn't come, for warmth that wasn't there. Dreams flickered, chasing his siblings through tall grass, suckling at his mother's belly, her tongue rasping his fur clean. Each dream dissolved into the endless, shivering dark. By morning, he had no tears left, only a stubborn spark deep inside, a voice that whispered, "Hold on." Someone will find you. Someone has to. But as the sun struggled through thick gray clouds, the world felt empty. Alone and exhausted, Harper wondered if the world had simply moved on, and if maybe, just maybe, he should too. Yet as the mist began to burn off, somewhere in the distance, the faintest sound of footsteps crunched over pine needles. Harper barely noticed, too lost in the haze of pain and hunger. He didn't know that fate was already changing course, that in the days to come, strangers would risk everything for a kitten the wild had nearly forgotten. But for now, Harper pressed deeper under the log, heart still beating. The world had left him behind, but his story was far from over. Dawn crept slow and uncertain through the northern Minnesota woods, fog curling low around the pines like ghostly fingers. Under the fallen log, Harper's world had shrunk to shallow breaths, aching ribs, and the memory of warmth. He was caught somewhere between sleep and waking, dreams flickering with the scent of his mother, her fur pressed close. Hunger gnawed at him, sharper now, a hollow ache in his tiny belly. But nature, indifferent and unyielding, offered no comfort. Somewhere not far off, coyotes barked and yipped, a savage, triumphant chorus that seemed to echo inside Harper's bones. A gust of wind rattled the trees overhead, scattering pine needles across the soggy ground. The world felt impossibly large and cruel, and Harper's will to keep fighting flickered like a dying flame. Yet something inside him, some stubborn, wild thread, pushed him to move. His little paws scraped at the dirt, weak and trembling. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself forward, inch by agonizing inch. The log scraped his back as he emerged into gray daylight. Instinct screamed at him to stay hidden, but desperation was louder. Harper stumbled through the ferns, dragging himself across the forest floor. He didn't get far. After just a few yards, exhaustion crashed over him, leaving him sprawled and wheezing, nose running, eyes sticky with sleep. The sun was just rising, and the world outside the log seemed both unfamiliar and hostile. But Harper didn't know, couldn't know, how close he was to being found. Miles away, on the edge of a modest farm that bordered the pine woods, Howard Jackson woke with the sun. He moved slow, careful not to wake his old dog, Scout, who lay curled at the foot of his bed. Howard stretched, feeling the familiar twinge in his back, a stubborn ache that came with too many years on this land, too many winters splitting wood and mending fences. After coffee, Howard stepped outside, breath fogging in the crisp morning air. His property was ringed by an old barbed wire fence, the pasture fading into wildness at the forest's edge. He whistled for Scout, boots crunching over frosted grass, his mind drifting to chores. Feed the chickens, check the barn roof, maybe fix that gate the deer kept knocking loose. But as Howard reached the fence line, he noticed something odd in the low brush. A movement, small and shivering, almost hidden among the ferns. At first, he thought it was a stray kitten. He'd seen enough barn cats dumped in these woods, thin and feral, always running from the world. But as he knelt, he saw the truth. This wasn't a house cat. Its legs were longer, the fur denser and speckled, the ears tufted in a way no tabbies ever were, and it was sick. Howard could see that instantly. The little creature wheezed, every breath a struggle. Its eyes were crusted, nose swollen and runny. There was a wild, desperate look in those yellow eyes, the kind Howard hadn't seen since he was a boy, back when the woods were full of stories and the world felt untamed. He crouched low, trying to make himself small. "Easy now," he murmured, voice rough with years but gentle. "Ain't gonna hurt you." Scout trotted up, tail wagging, but Howard waved him back. The bobcat kitten flinched, pressing itself into the dirt, eyes never leaving Howard's face. Howard's heart twisted. He'd always been soft when it came to animals. Took in strays, rescued injured birds, once spent half a winter coaxing a half-frozen raccoon back to health. But this was different. Wild animals were another story, especially ones this sick. Still, he couldn't just walk away. He studied the kitten for a moment longer, weighing his options. If he left it, the coyotes or cold would finish what nature had started. If he tried to help, he risked doing more harm than good. But sometimes, he thought, hope depends on one person not turning away, even when it's easier to mind your own business. Howard fished his phone from his pocket, scrolling through contacts until he found the number for the local wildlife rescue. The line rang, his breath visible in the morning chill. On the third ring, a woman answered. "This is Northwoods Wildlife Center, Ava speaking." Howard explained quickly, voice taut. "Found a wild kitten, Bobcat, I think. Real sick by the look of her. Need help." Ava's tone sharpened, all business. "Where are you? Can you keep eyes on her until we arrive?" Howard glanced at the kitten, who had curled herself into a trembling ball. "I'll stay put. She's not going anywhere soon." Ava promised they'd send a ranger as fast as possible. Howard hung up, settling onto his haunches, eyes never leaving the little bobcat. For the first time in years, he felt that old rush of purpose, the sense that maybe, just maybe, he could still make a difference. Scout lay down beside him, nose twitching, ears perked. The woods felt quieter now, the danger at bay for a moment. But Howard knew nothing was certain. The kitten's breathing was ragged, her sides heaving. Sometimes, the smallest creatures faced the hardest fights. Minutes passed like hours. Howard hummed softly, hoping to keep the kitten calm. "Hang in there, little one. Help's coming." The sun climbed higher, chasing fog from the pasture. Somewhere behind them, a truck rumbled up the dirt road. Howard stood, waving as a dark SUV parked by his mailbox. Ava Brooks, dressed in a ranger's uniform, strode across the field, her face set in a determined line. Behind her, another figure hefted a crate and a medical kit. "Show me," Ava said. Howard led them to the brush, heart pounding. Ava knelt, her movements slow and practiced. She murmured softly, her hands steady as she examined the kitten. "Female, maybe 2 months old. She's bad off. We need to move quick." The other rescuer slid a towel around Harper, careful but firm. The kitten tried to hiss, but only a pathetic croak came out. In moments, she was nestled in the crate, eyes wide and wild. As they carried her back to the truck, Ava turned to Howard. "Thank you," she said. "Most folks would have just kept walking." Howard shrugged, eyes stinging. "Sometimes you gotta stop, even when it hurts." As the truck sped away, Harper nestled in the warmth of the towel, the world spinning past in flashes of color and sound. For the first time, hope didn't feel so far away. Sometimes all it takes is one person not turning away, and sometimes that's enough to change everything. The drive to the Wildlife Center rattled Harper's world. The crate bounced with every pothole, and the hum of tires on gravel became a distant mechanical lullaby. Inside, Harper pressed herself into the farthest corner, nose buried beneath a towel, as if she could vanish from this frightening new reality. Everything smelled strange. Disinfectant, engine oil, the sharp tang of humans. So different from the cool, pine-scented woods she'd once known. Ava Brooks drove, hands gripping the wheel. Her mind raced with possible diagnoses and outcomes, eyes flicking to the back seat where the kitten huddled, each breath sounding like a broken whistle. She called ahead to the center, voice clipped but urgent. Severe respiratory distress, wild bobcat kitten. ETA 15 minutes. Prep exam room and call Dr. Tran. We'll need full sedation protocol ready. Every word was a thread holding hope together. When they arrived, Ava carried Harper inside, moving with the gentle swiftness of someone who'd done this dance before, but never let herself get numb to its stakes. The center was a flurry of motion. Volunteers hurrying, equipment being readied, voices lowered in respect for the delicate balance between life and death that hovered over their work. Dr. Michael Tran was already waiting, tall and calm, sleeves rolled up. His eyes sharpened the moment he saw Harper. A quick professional scan, then something softer, a flicker of protectiveness. Let's get her on oxygen. Ava, vitals and temp. Jess, I'll need the endoscope and suction kit. Stat. Harper barely noticed the hands around her now, moving with practiced care. She was laid on a soft towel beneath bright lights, a mask pressed to her face. Cool air hissed around her muzzle. Michael's hands were gentle but unyielding, probing her sinuses, feeling her swollen jaw, examining her gums. Each touch sent shudders through her, the line between pain and fear blurring. Ava checked the numbers. Temps high, pulse rapid. She's barely keeping up. Michael frowned. Severe obstruction in both nasal passages. No external wounds. This is more than a cold. He turned to the monitor as Ava began prepping a mild sedative. Harper felt the world turn watery, sounds receding, her own body fading as she slipped under. For a moment, the pain lifted. For a moment, she was back in the pines, running after her siblings, sunlight dappled on her back. But then there was nothing but the cold hum of machinery and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Michael peered through the endoscope, eyes narrowed in concentration. There, he muttered, pointing to the grainy image on screen. Inside Harper's sinuses, writhing shapes blocked the airway, fat, pale larvae nestled deep where air should flow. Michael's jaw tightened. Cuterebra, parasite infestation, severe. Ava exhaled, brow furrowed. Can you get them all? Michael didn't answer right away. He knew time was a razor, too long, an infection would spread. Harper would suffocate. Too quick, and he could cause irreparable damage. He looked at Ava, their shared worry hanging in the air. We'll do everything we can. Jess, I need microforceps, suction, and antibiotics. Prep a lavage. With Harper under, Michael worked quickly but meticulously. The clinic was silent but for the quiet shuffling of feet and the hum of machines. Michael guided the scope deep into Harper's nasal passages, careful not to tear the delicate lining. With steady hands, he extracted one larva, then another, their bodies twitching grotesquely as they left their host. Ava monitored vitals, voice low and urgent. O2 holding, pulse steady, keep going. Time stretched. Michael's world narrowed to the monitor and the tiny bobcat's fragile body, sweat beating on his brow. Each larva pulled free meant one more gasp of breath Harper could take, one more chance at a future in the wild. At one point, Harper's breathing stuttered. Ava's fingers hovered over the crash cart. Michael spoke softly, more to himself than anyone. Come on, little one. Stay with me. Outside the operating room, Howard Jackson paced the waiting area, hat twisting in his hands. He'd seen enough tragedy to know how quickly hope could turn. Every few minutes he peered through the glass, watching the team work. When Scout whined beside him, Howard scratched the old dog's ears, voice trembling. "She's tougher than she looks, buddy. Gotta be." Inside, Michael kept working. After what felt like hours, he pulled the last larva free, a fat, wriggling parasite almost as long as his pinky. He flushed Harper's sinuses, then checked her airway one more time. Clear. He let out a long breath, shoulders slumping with relief. Ava started Harper on IV antibiotics, watching as the kitten's chest rose and fell, still shallow but easier now. She placed a gentle hand on Harper's side, feeling the faint, rapid flutter of her heart. "She's not out of the woods yet, but you gave her a shot." Michael nodded, voice low. "She's a fighter. That's half the battle." The team cleaned up in silence, the weight of the moment pressing in. Michael stayed by Harper's side as she came out of sedation, his hand hovering protectively. Ava stepped outside to give Howard the update, her face serious but hopeful. "She made it through the procedure. It was close, but she's got a chance now. If infection doesn't take hold, she might just pull through." Howard's eyes shone, relief and worry mixing. She's got a lot of folks rooting for her now. Maybe that's enough. Inside, Harper stirred. The pain was different now. Dull, heavy, but not suffocating. The world smelled of antiseptic, and the lights were too bright. But she could breathe. For the first time in days, there was space in her chest for hope. As Michael whispered soothing words and Ava checked her IV, Harper drifted, suspended between fear and comfort, wild and cared for. In that fragile moment, the fight wasn't over, but it had turned. Sometimes, survival depends on the hands willing to do what nature cannot, and the hearts stubborn enough to keep hope alive. In the stillness of the recovery room, time seemed to slow to a trickle. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, blending with the steady hum of the heat lamp in Harper's enclosure. After the ordeal, her body was limp, every muscle slack with exhaustion, her sides rising and falling with cautious breaths. She was cocooned in a soft towel, nestled in the far corner of a small glass pen, separated from the outside world by a thin pane and the heavy air of uncertainty. It was a strange kind of limbo. Harper's dreams flickered with the sharp green of pine needles and the soft pulse of her mother's heartbeat. Now just a ghostly rhythm echoing in her bones. Sometimes she'd twitch in her sleep, legs kicking as if running through leaves and shadow. Other times she'd jolt awake, eyes wide and wild, ears flat, every instinct screaming that she didn't belong here. The air was sharp with antiseptic and unfamiliar voices, and there was no place to hide. But the pain had eased. The pressure in her nose and head was gone, replaced by a dull ache that faded with each passing hour. She was weak, so weak she could barely lift her head at first, but she could breathe. Each breath was a small miracle, a victory measured in the tiniest increments. Ava Brooks made it a habit to stop by Harper's enclosure every few hours. She'd sit on a low stool just outside the glass, her voice soft and soothing as she read from an old book of Minnesota legends, or simply talked about her day. She never made sudden movements. Sometimes she left a feather or a pine twig just inside the pen, bits of the forest Harper had lost, tokens of a world that still waited somewhere beyond the clinic walls. "There you go, little one," Ava murmured, sliding a twig into the pen one morning, her hand slow and careful. "Just a little piece of home." Harper eyed the offering, nose twitching. She didn't trust the human, not really, not the way she'd trusted her mother, or even the warm solidness of her siblings pressed against her side. But there was something steady in Ava's presence, something gentle. Harper didn't run. She didn't hiss. She just watched, silent, eyes never blinking. Michael Tran visited too, always checking the charts, adjusting the IV drip, making notes with his sharp, neat handwriting. He spoke less, but his care was just as constant. He'd pause by the pen and study Harper with a quiet intensity, as if trying to will her back to health. Every time she finished her food, a few spoonfuls of broth at first, then slivers of boiled chicken, he'd nod, a small smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "Good girl," he'd whisper, so softly only Harper could hear. The days blurred together in a gentle routine. Ava read stories. Michael checked vitals. Volunteers swept the clinic floors, their voices low and careful, as if afraid to break the fragile thread that tied Harper to this world. Harper's strength returned in fits and starts. One day she could stand. The next she managed a shaky step or two. Each purr that rumbled in her throat felt like a promise, a stubborn refusal to give up. Still, the wildness lingered. Harper remained wary, flinching at the clang of a dropped tray or the sudden bark of a dog in the kennel down the hall. At night, when the clinic quieted, she pressed her nose to the glass, staring into the darkness, longing for the hush and rustle of the pines. Dreams of her mother haunted her sleep, and she'd sometimes wake with a soft cry, searching for a presence that wasn't there. One afternoon, while cleaning, Ava caught Michael watching Harper with that same worried look. "You think she'll make it?" Ava asked, voice low. Michael shrugged, but his eyes were hopeful. "She's stronger than she looks. But she's wild, Ava. The hardest part won't be healing her body. It'll be making her believe she can survive out there again." Ava nodded, understanding. "She doesn't have to do it alone. Not while we're here." Later, Howard Jackson stopped by the clinic, hat in hand, curiosity and concern etched across his weathered face. He lingered near Harper's pen, watching her with quiet awe. "Never thought I'd see the day," he muttered, more to himself than anyone. "Little things got more fight in her than half the folks I know." Harper's recovery wasn't linear. Some nights her breathing grew rough again, and Michael would spend hours at her side, monitoring, adjusting medications, refusing to leave until her breaths evened out. Sometimes Harper refused food, and Ava would coax her with gentle words, warming her meals, draping a blanket over her enclosure, to mimic the feeling of safety she'd known in the wild. But there were moments of hope, too. The first time Harper groomed herself, tongue flicking awkwardly over her foreleg, the whole staff celebrated quietly. When she batted at a pine twig, chasing it in slow circles around her enclosure, Ava and Michael shared a look of real joy. "She's coming back to herself," Ava whispered. Michael nodded, pride in his voice. One tiny victory at a time. As the days grew shorter and the leaves outside the clinic burned gold and red, Harper's fur thickened, and her eyes grew brighter. She began to respond to the sights and smells of the world with curiosity rather than fear. Still, she remained a creature of the wild, never quite tame, never quite trusting, but alive. And with every heartbeat, she edged a little closer to the life she'd lost. Sometimes, you have to believe for them until they can believe for themselves. For Harper, hope wasn't a roar. It was a quiet, persistent presence, carried in every hand that cared, every voice that soothed, every patient hour spent waiting for a wild heart to remember what it means to fight. And outside, the pines waited, holding their breath for the day Harper would return. There's a strange kind of hope in the slow, stubborn work of recovery. It's measured not in giant leaps, but in inch-by-inch victories, a clean dish, a steady breath, a flick of the tail at a drifting feather. Harper's world grew larger as her strength returned, but so did her restlessness. The clinic walls, once her shield, became a prison. By the second week, Harper was standing solidly, fur thickening with the approach of winter, golden eyes bright and watchful. She stalked the boundaries of her glass pen, pacing with a predator's impatience, testing the limits of her confinement. She batted pine twigs, leapt for dangling string, and even hissed at her own reflection in the glass. Ava watched with pride and a growing sense of urgency. "She's healing," Michael said one morning, checking Harper's chart as she eyed him with suspicion. "But she's losing her wildness. We need to give her back what the woods taught her," Ava agreed. "If she's going to survive, she needs to remember who she is out there. We owe her a real chance." The answer came in the form of a project that turned the whole wildlife center upside down. On a clear afternoon, Ava and Michael recruited volunteers, including Howard Jackson, who arrived with Scout and a truckload of old logs. They transformed an overgrown patch of land behind the clinic into a natural enclosure. Fallen trees for climbing, boulders for perching, brush piles for hiding. Howard hammered together makeshift obstacles and even dragged in an ancient, hollowed stump from his property. "Better than any playground I ever built for my grandkids," Howard grinned, sweat streaking his brow as he lugged a log into place. "Wild ones need to play too." When the new pen was finished, Harper was carried outside in a crate, her nose twitching wildly at the crisp air, her ears pricked at the flutter and caw of wild birds overhead. Ava opened the door and stepped back. For a heartbeat, Harper froze. Then, in a blur of fur and claws, she bounded out, vanishing into the tangled shadows. She moved cautiously at first, hugging the edges, eyes wide with wonder and fear. Every rustle sent her crouching. But the sense of pine, earth, and distant creek awakened something ancient inside her. It didn't take long before Harper was climbing, leaping, and pouncing with tentative joy. She chased after leaves that tumbled in the breeze, scaled the lowest limbs, and dug at the loose dirt, her claws scraping and flexing, muscle memory returning. For Ava and Michael, it was a bittersweet thrill. Each day they watched Harper grow more competent, stalking, ambushing, hiding her food under leaves, just as her mother must have taught her. She practiced climbing the tallest snag, and when a jay swooped too close, she hissed and flattened her ears, wild and fierce. Sometimes, Ava left a feather or two inside the pen, and Harper would leap for them, swatting them out of the air with quick, precise strikes. "She's getting her edge back," Michael observed, pride and worry mingling in his voice. "She's almost ready." But wildness wasn't the only threat waiting outside the clinic. One morning, Howard arrived with grim news. He'd seen fresh tire tracks near the forest's edge, right where the land dipped toward the creek. A neighbor mentioned hearing shots in the night. Illegal, judging by the time and location. "Poacher," Howard said, his voice low. "Somebody's prowling the woods, looking for easy prey." The news hit hard. The local wildlife had always faced dangers, harsh winters, hungry coyotes, but a poacher was something else. It was a threat born not from nature, but from greed and carelessness. For Harper, it meant the world outside wasn't just beautiful and wild, it was also dangerous in new ways. The center tightened security. Ava and Michael reinforced the outdoor enclosure, adding cameras and motion lights. Volunteers took turns keeping watch at night, and a sense of community urgency swept through the small town. People who'd barely spoken to each other before began exchanging phone numbers and tips, forming a loose-knit network to protect not just Harper, but every wild creature in the pines. Howard, who'd once believed his days of usefulness were behind him, found a new sense of purpose. He joined the night patrols, flashlight in hand, Scout trotting faithfully beside him. He talked to the local sheriff, posted signs warning trespassers, and spread the word through the local diner, where rumors always traveled faster than facts. Ava held a meeting for the volunteers in the clinic's cramped kitchen, her voice clear and determined. "We can't let fear dictate what we do. We're responsible for every animal that calls these woods home, Harper especially. If you see anything, anyone suspicious, you call me or Michael. Don't confront anyone alone." As days passed, Harper's training intensified. Michael rigged up scent trails using feathers and rabbit fur, encouraging her to hunt and stalk as she would in the wild. Harper's first attempts were clumsy, her pounces off target, but soon her instincts sharpened. One afternoon, she caught her first mouse, pinning it beneath her paws with a fierce, triumphant yowl. Ava and Michael watched from a distance, resisting the urge to cheer. At dusk, as the sun dipped below the pines and shadows lengthened, Harper would climb to the highest log and gaze beyond the fence, her body silhouetted against the glowing sky. Sometimes she'd let out a lonely, questioning yowl, a wild call that lingered in the air long after night had fallen. The community listened. The town's social media pages filled with updates on the Bobcat Kitten. Children drew pictures of Harper, taping them to the windows of the clinic. Bobcat watch signs appeared in yards, and the threat of the poacher, while real, became a rallying point, a reason to look out for each other, to believe in something bigger than themselves. Harper, for her part, seemed both oblivious and aware. She tested the fence, tried new paths through the brambles, and learned the rhythm of dusk and dawn. The wild inside her was alive again, cautious, clever, persistent. She was becoming herself, piece by piece, preparing for a life that would demand everything from her. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, it was a fight Harper didn't have to face alone. Night in the northern woods was never truly silent. But lately, the hush around the clinic felt different, weighted, uneasy. The community's resolve had hardened in the face of the poacher's threat, but so had their nerves. Every distant crack of a branch, every set of headlights crawling down the old logging road set hearts pounding and eyes scanning shadows for danger. For Harper, the changes were subtle but real. Ava and Michael kept her enclosure even more secure, double-checking the locks, moving her indoors before dusk, and limiting visitors to those they trusted absolutely. The outdoor pen, once her sanctuary, now felt smaller, edged by a new kind of danger. She sensed it too, a tension in the humans' movements, a watchfulness in their voices. It wasn't long before the threat became real. One foggy evening, as Howard made his rounds with Scout, flashlight slicing through the dense mist, the dog froze, hackles up. Howard followed Scout's stare to a dark shape lingering just beyond the fence. The figure melted into the trees before Howard could get a clear look, but a chill went down his spine. He found fresh boot prints by the enclosure, muddy and too large for any of the volunteers. The next morning, Ava found the outer fence disturbed, wires bent, a segment of mesh clipped and hastily repaired. She called Michael, voice tight with fear. "He's been here. He's getting bolder." Michael didn't waste a moment. He called the local police, filed a report, and worked with Howard to add more cameras and motion sensor lights around the property. They reinforced the enclosure with heavier gauge wire and set up a night watch schedule. 2 people on patrol every night, armed with phones, whistles, and a fierce determination not to let Harper, or any wild creature, fall victim. Word spread through town, and the community rallied. A neighbor donated 2 trail cameras. The local diner kept a thermos of coffee hot for the night shift, and the town's Facebook page overflowed with updates, warnings, and offers of help. Parents who once kept their distance brought their children to draw "Go Harper" signs for the clinic windows. The threat of the poacher, instead of dividing people, united them like never before. But fear still stalked the edges. Ava hardly slept, nerves frayed by the constant vigilance. She spent hours walking the perimeter, shining her flashlight into the pines, searching for any sign of the intruder. Michael took to sleeping in his office, medical kit always at the ready, just in case. Even Howard, who'd prided himself on his calm, found his hands trembling some nights as he patrolled with Scout. The tension reached a breaking point a week later. The security cameras, rigged to send alerts to Michael's phone, pinged just after midnight. A shadowy figure moved along the back fence, pausing by the enclosure, flashlight beam flickering over the locks. Michael called Ava, who rushed over, her heart pounding. Howard and 2 other volunteers joined them, flashlights bobbing as they fanned out around the pen. For a long, breathless moment, it seemed the intruder would break through. But the presence of so many lights, the barking of Scout, and the unmistakable sound of Ava's voice calling out, "We see you! The police are on their way!" It was enough. The figure retreated, melting into the darkness. Ava's hands shook as she checked on Harper, who crouched in the corner of her enclosure, ears flat and eyes wide. "It's okay, little one," Ava whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We're here. Nobody's going to hurt you." She reached through the mesh and placed a soft feather beside Harper, a reminder of wildness, of freedom, of hope. The next day, the sheriff came by, inspecting the damage and promising more patrols. The incident became the talk of the town. The local newspaper ran a front-page story. "Community fights back against poacher, Bobcat Kitten inspires town's resolve." People who'd never met Harper now spoke of her with protectiveness, as if she were one of their own. For Michael and Ava, the night's events were a sobering reminder of how fragile second chances could be. Michael spent the morning reviewing camera footage, analyzing every movement, looking for clues. He found a blurry shot, a tall figure in a hooded jacket, gloved hands working at the fence. Nothing to identify him, but it was enough to fuel their vigilance. Howard took his turn on night patrol, flashlight tucked in his belt, Scout's leash tight in his hand. He thought about the world as it had been when he was young. Wilder, yes, but also, in a way, safer. Now it seemed the wildness needed protecting, not just from nature's dangers, but from the ones people brought with them. That night, as the patrols walked their circuit, Ava sat with Harper inside the clinic, reading softly, her voice low and soothing. Michael joined them, sitting cross-legged on the floor, a mug of cooling coffee in his hands. "I used to think the wild could take care of itself," Ava said quietly. "But I guess sometimes it needs a little help from us." Michael nodded, glancing at Harper, who watched them with calm, golden eyes. "It's not just about one bobcat, is it? It's about every life we're responsible for, every bit of wildness left." For Harper, the world remained uncertain, but in the faces of the humans who circled her world, tired, vigilant, stubbornly hopeful, she sensed something she didn't fully understand: belonging. The threat was real, but so was the bond that now held her in its quiet, determined grasp. Outside, the autumn wind whispered through the pines. The community stood watch, hearts open and eyes sharp. determined to guard the wild hope they'd found in a single, stubborn bobcat kitten. And for the first time, the wild seemed a little less alone. With each sunrise, the pines outside the wildlife center deepened to the color of old emeralds, the world crisp with the promise of fall. A cold snap swept through Minnesota, stripping the maples to gold and fire, bringing an urgency to the work in Harper's outdoor pen. Nature was changing, and Harper was changing too, growing into her own wildness, claw by claw, muscle by muscle, moment by moment. After the poacher's intrusion, the staff doubled down on training. Harper's days began at dawn, when Ava scattered scent trails of rabbit fur and feathers through the enclosure. The young bobcat crept low, eyes narrowed, body tense. Sometimes she failed, bounding too soon and sending her prey flying out of reach. But more and more she succeeded, her pounces landing with a satisfying thump, her instincts sharpening. One afternoon, Michael watched from behind the safety glass as Harper crouched motionless, every muscle quivering, eyes fixed on a twitching tuft of grass. She waited, patient, until a fat mouse scurried into view. In a blur, Harper sprang, trapping the mouse beneath her paw. Michael's heart lifted as she delivered a swift, precise bite, quick, clean, wild. "She's got it," he murmured, pride softening his usually reserved voice. "She's a real bobcat again." That evening, Ava set up a tougher test. She placed a fresh rabbit pelt on a line, rigged to move with the wind. Harper stalked the shifting shape for nearly an hour, never giving up, adjusting her approach again and again until she finally managed to snatch it from the wire. Her tail swished in satisfaction, a wild grin in her eyes. But the tests weren't just about hunting. The world outside the pen was unpredictable, and Harper needed more than hunger and muscle. She needed courage, cunning, and the ability to stand her ground. That trial came unexpectedly, just after dusk, when a red fox, drawn by the scent of meat, slipped through a gap in the outer fence and crept close to Harper's pen. The fox was hungry and bold, baring its teeth at Harper through the mesh. For a heartbeat, Harper hesitated, ears back, tail puffed. Then something shifted inside her. She lowered her head, let out a low, guttural growl, and charged the fence. The fox flinched, yelped, and bolted back into the darkness. Harper stood tall, breath coming in quick, proud bursts. Ava and Michael watched in awe. "She's ready," Ava whispered. "She's really ready." The news spread through the center, and the volunteers buzzed with excitement and nerves. Howard, whose steady hands had built Harper's pen, visited every afternoon, quietly proud. He watched as Harper climbed, leapt, and crouched in the dusk, a silhouette against the reddening sky. "You know," he said to Ava, "I thought my days of making a difference were behind me. Turns out all it took was a stubborn little cat to remind me." Ava smiled, eyes bright. "You gave her more than logs and fencing, Howard. You gave her a shot at wildness." For Harper, the world inside the pen grew smaller each day. She paced the perimeter at night, sniffing the cold breeze, eyes following the shadows. She buried food, sharpened her claws on rough bark, and grew bolder with every hour. Sometimes she'd climb to the top of the tallest snag and stare out at the endless forest, a longing tugging at her chest. Michael watched her one evening, arms folded across his chest, a bittersweet ache gnawing at him. "She's ready to go," he said softly to Ava. "But are we ready to let her?" Ava shook her head, a sad smile curving her lips. "Doesn't matter if we're ready. The wild's waiting, and she's earned her place back." They ran the final assessments. tracking Harper's weight, muscle tone, reflexes. She passed every test, each number confirming what their hearts already knew. She was fit, fierce, and wild. The time had come to let her go. The community gathered for a quiet, early morning meeting. The plan was simple but meticulous. Release Harper into a protected wildlife corridor, far from roads and homes, in land monitored by both the center and local conservationists. Ava, Michael, Howard, and a handful of volunteers prepared the transport crate, laying it with pine boughs and soft grass. Ava tucked one last feather inside, a final piece of the forest to send Harper on her way. Before dawn, Howard knelt by Harper's pen, hand pressed to the glass. "You go show them, little one," he whispered, voice rough. "Show them what second chances are for." Inside, Harper sensed the change. She was cautious as always, but her eyes were alert and curious as Ava and Michael coaxed her gently into the transport crate. The trip was quiet, solemn. The landscape rolled by, pines blurring past, sunlight streaking through early fog. Michael drove, jaw set, hands steady on the wheel. Ava sat beside the crate, murmuring reassurance, though her heart ached with every mile. At the edge of the pine hollow corridor, they paused. The forest here was old and untouched, a safe haven for creatures like Harper. Birds called, and the crisp air was alive with the scent of earth and fallen needles. Ava and Michael carried the crate to a mossy clearing, Howard close behind. The moment was both triumphant and tender, everyone knowing that what they'd worked for was about to become something wilder, freer, and infinitely more uncertain. Ava unlatched the door. For a second, Harper hesitated. Then, with the sun rising behind her, she slipped into the underbrush, quick and silent, every movement pure grace. She paused only once, looking back with bright, wild eyes before vanishing into the world she was born to claim. There was silence as the group watched the spot where Harper disappeared. No one spoke, but everyone felt it, the hope, the ache, the pride of letting go. "She'll make it," Howard said at last, voice shaking with emotion. "She's got everything she needs now." Ava nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "And so do we." In that golden dawn, surrounded by the wild they had fought so hard to protect, the team understood. To truly love the wild is to trust it, to set it free, and to hope, always hope, that it finds its way home. Dawn was just beginning to break over the northern Minnesota forest when the transport truck pulled off the dirt road, tires crackling over frost-hardened needles. In the half-light, the pines looked endless and ancient, trunks vanishing into fog, the ground dappled with shadows that seemed to stretch all the way back in time. The air was sharp with cold, tinged with the musk of earth and cedar, the kind of scent that says, "You are nowhere and everywhere, you are home." For Harper, every sense was awake. The moment the crate's door slid open, she hesitated, not with fear, but with a feral, searching curiosity. Her nose twitched, reading 1,000 stories in the air. The passing of a fox hours before, the scuffle of grouse wings in the brush, the distant musk of deer. She stepped forward, muscles coiled, body vibrating with instinct. Sunlight filtered through the branches in gold ribbons, lighting her coat and making her eyes glow wild and bright. Behind her, the humans held their breath. Ava and Michael knelt a few yards back, resisting the urge to reach out, to call her name, to beg her to stay just one moment longer. Howard stood with his hands in his pockets, head bowed as if in prayer. Even Scout, the old dog, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, tail wagging slow and respectful. Harper paused at the edge of the clearing, the forest opening before her like a promise. She looked back once, eyes meeting Ava's through the thinning fog. For a heartbeat, everything was still. The people, the trees, the trembling hush of the world holding its breath. Then, without a sound, Harper turned and vanished into the underbrush, her body melting into the wild like a shadow at sunrise. The silence that followed was full of meaning, aching, hopeful, proud. Ava let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Michael blinked hard, brushing away the memory of Harper's first frightened hours in the clinic, the desperate fight for every breath. Howard squeezed Ava's shoulder, his voice rough but warm. She's home now. That's what matters. They lingered in the clearing, watching the pines for any sign of Harper, but the forest kept its secrets, folding her back into its arms. Eventually, the team returned to the truck, every step weighted with bittersweet pride. As they drove back, Ava stared out the window, her thoughts tangled in the enormity of what had just happened. Saving a wild animal, she realized, was never about ownership or control. It was about trust. Trusting that, when given a second chance, the wild can reclaim what's rightfully its own. It was about letting go, even when every instinct screamed to hold on. At the center, news of Harper's release spread quickly. Volunteers gathered in the break room, celebrating with coffee and donuts, sharing stories about Harper's quirks, her cautious first pounce, the way she'd bat pine twigs with increasing confidence, her piercing, golden gaze. Children from the Bobcat Watch Club drew new pictures, taping them to the clinic's bulletin board. Harper leaping through tall grass. Harper sleeping under the stars. Harper staring down a fox twice her size. Michael took a long walk through the woods that afternoon, boots crunching over frosted leaves, thoughts spinning with pride and humility. He knew Harper's journey was only beginning, that her survival would depend on everything she'd learned and the luck of the wild. Yet he also knew, deep in his bones, that letting her go had been the truest act of compassion he could offer. We can heal, feed, and shelter, he mused, watching a red squirrel dart up a trunk. But wildness, that's a gift only nature can complete. Howard, for his part, found himself at the diner that evening, retelling Harper's story to anyone who would listen. Old-timers, kids, tourists passing through. He spoke not just of the kitten's fight, but of the way the community had rallied, coming together over night patrols, hand-lettered signs, and hope that stretched across fences and front porches. He realized, in a quiet moment, that Harper had done more than survive. She'd given his town a new reason to look out for what mattered. Back at the center, Ava drafted a letter for the Pine Hollow Corridor's new Wildlife Watch. She described the project's first success story. A bobcat kitten, once left for dead, now a symbol of everything they could achieve together. Compassion, she wrote, means equipping others to thrive on their own, even when it breaks your heart to say goodbye. The wild is not ours to keep, but it is ours to protect. As the sun set behind the pines, Harper moved through her new world with cautious grace. The land was alive with sound, crows gossiping overhead, the distant rush of a stream, the urgent hush of wind in the needles. Harper climbed a fallen log, scenting the air, feeling her body grow stronger with every step. The memory of her mother lingered in the dusk, but now the forest was her only family, her only teacher. In time, she found a hollow under a tangle of roots, a shelter from the cold, hidden from fox and coyote. She dozed, ears flicking at every sound, body curled tight. Hunger would push her out into the open again, But for now she was safe, wrapped in the embrace of the land that had almost forgotten her. For the caretakers, the lesson was clear. True compassion is measured not by what you keep, but by what you set free. They'd given Harper every tool they could: medicine, food, shelter, the space to relearn her wildness. The rest was hers to claim. The story spread far beyond Pine Hollow. News outlets picked up the tale, and soon other wildlife centers called to ask about the community's methods. More land was designated as protected corridors, and the Bobcat Watch became a model for coexistence. But for those who'd walked with Harper every step of her journey, her return to the wild was something sacred, a reminder that hope is stubborn, wildness is precious, and sometimes letting go is the bravest thing of all. The first real snow fell just a week after Harper's release, a powdery, glimmering blanket that softened the sharp lines of the pines and hushed the world beneath a million icy crystals. To most people in Pine Hollow, it was just another Minnesota winter settling in. But for those who'd followed Harper's journey, each snowfall was a silent prayer. Every gust of wind through the trees a question. Had she made it? Was she still out there, fighting, thriving, wild? Harper adapted quickly. The first days in the forest were full of challenges, each one a test of everything she'd learned in the enclosure and everything her wild heart remembered. The woods were full of old scents and new dangers: the bitter tang of fox, the musky trail of deer, the ever-present threat of coyote. Food was scarce, and hunger made her bold. She tracked voles through the snow, learned to leap for birds startled from low branches, and slipped through brambles on silent paws. One cold morning, a motion-activated camera hidden at the forest's edge caught a grainy image of a small bobcat with thick, matted fur and fierce golden eyes. Later that week, a biologist monitoring tracking tags confirmed what everyone at the Wildlife Center hoped. Harper was alive, and she wasn't alone. The footage showed Harper lingering near a shallow creek, sniffing the air, then pausing as another young bobcat approached. For a moment, they circled each other warily, each movement a dance of memory and instinct. Then, as if some old recognition flared between them, the two kittens touched noses and tumbled in a brief, wild play fight before disappearing into the underbrush together. For the staff and volunteers at the center, it was the proof they'd prayed for. Harper had found her siblings, lost in the chaos that had first separated them. Against all odds, the family was whole again. The news swept through Pine Hollow like wildfire. Howard called Ava at dawn, his voice thick with tears. She did it. She found her way home. The children at the Bobcat Watch Club cheered and drew new pictures, this time of a whole bobcat family prowling under a star-bright sky. At the diner, people raised their coffee mugs in silent salute whenever the story came up, pride radiating through every word. But the impact went deeper than simple celebration. The Pine Hollow corridor, once just a line on a map, became a point of pride for the entire region, a living symbol of what could happen when people put aside their differences for something greater. New signs went up at trailheads: wildlife protected area, respect the wild. Teachers wove Harper's story into their lessons, using it to spark discussions about conservation, compassion, and resilience. Ava, Michael, and Howard met often to review new footage, update the local wildlife website, and quietly share their amazement. Each time Harper appeared, slinking through snow, pouncing on a mouse, or sunning herself on a rock, it felt like a gift, a secret glimpse into a world most people never got to see. One evening, as winter deepened, Ava stood at the edge of the corridor, watching the trees sway in the wind. She remembered the first night she'd seen Harper, small, broken, barely alive. She remembered the sleepless nights, the worry, the hope that seemed too fragile to name. And now, Harper was out here somewhere, fierce and free. Michael joined her, snow crunching beneath his boots. He carried a camera trap to check, but for a while they just stood together in silence, letting the cold sting their cheeks. "You ever wonder," Ava murmured, "if letting go was really the right thing?" Michael smiled gently, watching the horizon. "Every day. But that's the wild, isn't it? It's not about us. It never was." They both knew that Harper's survival wasn't guaranteed. The wild was beautiful, but it was never safe. Coyotes still prowled. Food could run short. Storms would come. But for Harper, and for the people who loved her, that was the point. The wild was not a guarantee. It was a gift. For Howard, the story settled into his bones like the cold, sometimes aching, but mostly warm. He noticed things he hadn't before, the way fresh tracks crossed his property, how the pines seemed to whisper on clear nights, the sudden hush that would fall at dusk. He told his grandchildren about Harper, not as a fairy tale, but as a promise. "Every second chance matters," he'd say. "Every life you help, no matter how small, comes back to you in ways you can't imagine." The Pine Hollow corridor drew visitors from all over, and soon the community formed new patrols and citizen science groups. Neighbors who'd never spoken before now shared data, tracked animal movements, and watched for poachers as one. The land itself felt changed, loved, protected, alive with purpose. And Harper? Her story rippled outward, reaching classrooms, community centers, and dinner tables. For some, she was a simple tale of survival. For others, she became a symbol, a reminder that true love, hope, and courage are not about holding on, but about giving away what you most fear to lose. In time, Ava wrote up the story for a regional wildlife magazine. She ended her piece with a simple truth. The greatest thing we did for Harper wasn't rescuing her, but letting her go. She reminded us that the true measure of hope is what we set free. On a snowy night, long after the world had quieted, a small bobcat prowled the edge of the forest, strong and wary. She paused to look back at the distant lights of the town, her breath rising in silvery plumes. In the hush, the wild seemed to answer, echoing her courage, her stubbornness, and the love that had set her free. And so Harper's story became a part of the pines, a wild echo returning to those who had the heart to listen. For me, this isn't just a story about a bobcat kitten who beat the odds. It's about hope, unyielding, stubborn, sometimes so fragile it feels like it might blow away in the wind. Harper's journey, from the fog-draped pines of northern Minnesota to the wild freedom she finally claimed, is a mirror for every person who's ever felt left behind or wished for a second chance. The woods are quiet now, blanketed by deep winter. Most days, Harper is just another shadow in the endless green, her coat blending with the shadows, her footsteps lost in the hush. But every so often, a camera trap will flash, and there she is. Golden eyes, sharp, body lean and strong, a flash of wildness moving through the place that once almost claimed her. In town, the legend of Harper has taken on a life of its own. Her story is told in classrooms and community meetings, over cups of coffee at the diner and whispered between parents and children at bedtime. To the people of Pine Hollow, Harper is more than just a bobcat. She's a symbol of everything they want to protect. A reminder that kindness isn't weakness, that hope is worth the risk, that even in a world that can feel harsh and indifferent, small victories matter. Ava Brooks, the ranger who first cradled Harper in trembling hands, still visits the Pine Hollow corridor whenever she can. She walks quietly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of the place, her breath rising in clouds. Sometimes she'll find fresh tracks in the snow, or catch a glimpse of a bobcat's shadow slipping through the underbrush. Those moments bring tears to her eyes, not out of sadness, but gratitude. "We gave her a second chance," she'll whisper. "But she gave us something bigger. She gave us hope." Michael Tran, ever the scientist, tracks Harper's movements through data and trail cameras. But even he admits that numbers can't capture the magic of seeing a wild creature thrive. "There's always risk," he says to new volunteers. "But the greatest risk is never trying at all. Letting go is hard. But sometimes, that's what love really looks like." Howard Jackson, retired now but more involved than ever, leads community walks and tells Harper's story to anyone willing to listen. For him, the lesson is simple. "We're all wild at heart," he says. "We all need a little help sometimes. And when we get that help, it's our job to pass it on." The community has changed too. The Bobcat Watch Club grew into a full-fledged network. Neighbors checking trail cams, picking up litter, planting native shrubs to help the animals thrive. New protected land was designated, more wildlife corridors carved out. People found purpose in watching, in caring, in the daily work of protecting something that cannot thank them, but somehow does. But Harper's story is not just for those who live near the pines. It's for anyone who's ever wondered if it's too late to change, too late to begin again. For those who have felt invisible, lost, or underestimated. Harper was left behind, forgotten, nearly taken by the cold and the dark. But someone saw her, stopped, reached out, refused to turn away. Sometimes that's all it takes. One act of kindness, one stubborn belief that the world can be better. Maybe you've needed a second chance yourself, or maybe you've given one, not knowing if it would ever make a difference. Maybe you share your life with someone, animal or human, who is fighting to belong, to heal, to trust again. If so, let Harper's story be a light in the fog, a reminder that change can start small and slow, but with patience, courage, and care, it can become something wild and beautiful. So tonight, if you're listening, do something gentle for someone fighting their own silent battle. Leave the porch light on a little longer. Share your warmth, your time, your patience. Offer forgiveness or ask for it if you need to. Protect what's wild inside you, inside those you love, inside the world you call home. And if Harper's story moved you, share it. Pass it along to someone who might need a little hope, or leave a comment about your own moment of resilience. Like and follow this channel for more real stories from the wild. Because sometimes, the smallest victories change everything. In the end, the wild returns what we give it. Patience, courage, and the chance to begin again. Harper is out there tonight, wild and whole, a living testament to what's possible when we choose compassion over indifference, hope over fear. Her story is not over. Neither is yours. And if you ever doubt that one small life can matter, remember Harper. Remember that every second chance given returns tenfold, echoing back in ways we may never fully see, but can always feel. That's a wild kind of hope, and it belongs to all of us.